Thank you, everyone. So as Mia said, my name is Jessie Jones. I'm a member of Women in AI Ethics, and I'm also a COO of Beacon Trust Network. So welcome to our session. It's entitled Building for Privacy. And I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. So if there's ever a time, I would say, to fix our systems, it's now. We're looking at the pace of technology, the imminence of AI, creating more value. It's promised, increased revenue opportunities, improving operational efficiencies, increasing customer satisfaction. And that was the promise. What a lot of AI ethics practitioners and researchers are starting to realize is that these promises are coming at a cost. So this need for data has created this market demand that we're seeing to increase personalization. It's now crossed a dangerous line, and providing relevant ads and content to consumers has actually turned into now tracking people at much more personal levels, leveraging data to build profiles, creating features to manipulate behaviors, and increasing engagement and product addiction while slowly creating what I guess we term this surveillance state. And it allows both business and government to actually have more increasing knowledge about people and groups than they actually should have. So perhaps we're too hasty in putting our faith into systems like Google and Facebook, who promised us that they do no evil. So DuckDuckGo, as Mia had pointed out, they're changing the narrative because they are a technology for good company. That truly creates a human-centered lens in their pursuit of building great products while ensuring privacy and the well-being of people and society. So today I'm honored to be joined by Cate Huston, Director of Engineering for Mobile at DuckDuckGo, who will take us through her journey to DuckDuckGo, plus address today's digital challenges, the increasing need for data, even at a time when privacy awareness has become more heightened. So a little bit about Cate. In addition to being an engineer at DuckDuckGo, she's also an advisor to Glowforge. She previously worked at Automatic, where she led the mobile Jetpack and developer experience teams there. She admins the newish mobile manager Slack and has written extensively for Quartz. You can find her on Twitter at Cate Huston, so CateHSTN, and her blog, Cate.blog. So Cate, welcome, Cate.
Hi, Hessie. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Okay, so let's start off with your personal journey. You used to work at Google, and now you work at DuckDuckGo. So what did you do at Google, and what motivated you to make your journey eventually to DuckDuckGo?
Yeah, I mean, I started my career at Google. I dropped out of grad school and went to Google. It's, the usual way. And there I was a developer working on various iOS and Android apps. And at DuckDuckGo, I lead the native apps org. So, it's making sure that we deliver great products across all the platforms. At Google, I bought into the idea of don't be evil, but at this point in the world, at this point in my career, I just find that insufficient, not being evil is not sufficient to change fundamentally broken systems. We need to be anti-evil and dismantle them.
Okay, so you touched a little bit on your personal beliefs. Let's expand on that a little bit more about your values. And even as a member of the tech community, how do you see your role and the role of many of these tech providers?
Yeah, so I was reading a fascinating article in Fast Company about tabs the other day, because when you work on a browser, articles about tabs are fascinating. But one point that really stood out to me is that the internet is now 1 billion times bigger than it was 20 years ago. And it requires 1 trillion human hours a year, like 10% of all labor to make sense of. And as metrics for the impact that those of us who work on the impact can have, it's pretty wild, And I think that level of impact comes with some serious responsibility that has not always been taken seriously, and even hidden behind these cute slogans like don't be evil or privacy by design. Other fields of engineering tend to take ethics a lot more seriously, but I think in tech there's so many examples of very questionably ethical behavior, right, that get talked about as innovation, but in reality are around dismantling hard-won protections, whether it's around worker rights or financial regulation. Innovating on top of broken systems perpetuates them, and we need to rethink some of the decisions of the last 20 years. The internet started as a research project, and now it's part of the fabric of society. Did we make it production ready?
That's interesting. That's it. I think it is becoming part of the fabric of our society, and I think, and that's the same thing with this idea of search. And and you are in the thick of it with Google. Now let's spend some time talking about the story of DuckDuckGo. The company launched in 2008 as a search engine. So let's start there. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so DuckDuckGo, for those who aren't aware, is the internet privacy company for everyone who's had enough of hidden online tracking and wants to take back their privacy. So for over a decade, we've built products, created new technology, and worked with policymakers to make online privacy simple and accessible. So every day, millions of people rely on our free all-in-one solution, private search engine, tracker blocker, mobile browser to stay private online. So you can use our mobile app instead of Chrome as a browser. You can use DuckDuckGo search instead of Google. And if you do both, then you'll have the same internet, but with more privacy. So like you said, Gabe Weinberg started DuckDuckGo in 2008. And initially it was like a personal project to improve search results with like more relevant links and less spam. And over time, it's evolved into a global privacy company. And we've seen annual growth alongside the growing demand for online privacy. In 2018, in order to provide protection beyond search, we launched the DuckDuckGo Privacy mobile app and the DuckDuckGo Privacy Essentials desktop browser extension. So now with a single download, users get privacy simplified. So tracker blocking, HTTPS upgrading, private search. Couple of other factoids. We have 62% year-on-year growth in average daily searches between 2019 and 2020. And we're the #2 mobile search engine in major markets such as Australia, the UK, the US, and Canada. And we're the #1 downloaded browser on Android, the #2 on iOS after Chrome.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and by the way, I don't know who uses Chrome these days. I'd love to be able to get a stat on how many people have actually disengaged Chrome as their browser. So if you have that, I'd love that. Okay, so let's go back to 2013. And if people remember, that was the big revelation of Edward Snowden and the secretive PRISM program that exposed the massive data collection of the internet by the NSA, the federal government, and then bringing in a big tech internet firms like Microsoft, Apple, Verizon, Yahoo, AT&T, et cetera. People at this point suddenly became a lot more aware of the extent of the information that was being collected and aggregated without a lot of their knowledge or consent. So at this time, was this a fortuitous event for DuckDuckGo?
I mean, we've seen annual growth alongside the growing demand for online privacy. So the Snowden revelations were an inflection point in the public's understanding of the surveillance economy, but there are other events that have also helped raise awareness. So for example, the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica situation. Aside from these kind of big events, people feel like their privacy online is being violated every day. Like people find ads following them around the internet for the thing they searched for or just thought of, really, really creepy. I think this year we've seen companies like Apple and Google making these really big privacy announcements. And that tells us that privacy is officially mainstream. Now, whether these things actually do anything for user privacy is still an open question, right? But it's clear that there's at least enough of a perception problem to elevate that conversation. Now, other things that's really fascinating is Facebook took out these full-page apps against Apple's stance on privacy. And it really brings more awareness to the conversation, and it shows how deeply Facebook relies on tracking. But the level of privacy that Facebook is fighting about does not represent a comprehensive privacy platform. We're glad for this awareness, but there's still a lot more to go.
Yeah, and I like the fact that there is this kind of rift between Facebook and Apple in a way, because now you have two tech platforms that are on opposite sides of the spectrum, and you will see whether or not. And I hear this big, what's it called? discussion about whether or not all tech is bad. I mean, Apple has this privacy stance, and we'll see where it goes. Now, so let's talk about an understanding of the risks if things don't change. There are a lot of people, like you said, now they're seeing uh, privacy risks to them, where you said it's getting a lot more creepy. People now want privacy, but they don't know how to get it. Alternatively, they believe that maybe it's just beyond their power and control. From your experience, have you seen some of these consumer perceptions change in the last few years when it comes to people's privacy rights?
Yeah, so in a survey by the EU Commission's Office of Statistics, 89% of Europeans agreed that the default setting of their browser should be to stop their information from being shared. Like, this is what the DuckDuckGo browser does by design. Now, according to a recent Pew Research study, around half of Americans adults said they had recently decided not to use a product or service because they were worried about how much personal information would be collected about them. 41% of Europeans do not want to share any information with private companies. And 40% of Europeans avoid certain websites because they're worried that their online activities will be monitored. So it's clear that there's this desire, right? But to your point, like, people don't necessarily think it's possible. And so, obviously we researched that, and we found that 36% of respondents felt that it wasn't possible to be private. 22% thought it would be too complicated to figure out, and 22% were just not sure how to do it. Now, the most popular apps that people use every day were not designed to protect people's privacy, but when products make getting privacy simple, people will act on it to protect their privacy. So the Apple 14.5 update is such a great example of that, because only 5% of users have opted into app tracking since that update was released. Now, there's so much demand for this, and this has been the driver of just a really exciting period of growth for DuckDuckGo in the last 12 months.
Okay. No, that's great. So I think, this is one question I want to ask you specifically, because as people move away from Google, because they're starting to see things like Google using data like IP address, cookies, even within their Google Analytics, to be able to collect a lot more information from people. For DuckDuckGo as a search engine, you have to achieve relevant results. So how do you do that?
Yeah, so the question that we ask ourselves is that if you rebuild the tools that people use every day, like a mobile browser or search engine, to actually protect people's privacy, how would you do that? And the surprising answer is that you don't need to collect people's personal data or monitor their behavior online to build a great product. I think many companies default to putting tracking data on every user action, but we default to the other extreme. We default to nothing. We measure some quantities of user behavior that allows us to assess impact and make decisions about priority. But the amount of data required is very low, and none of it is tied to the user. So, for example, we know how many times the bookmark button was tapped, but what we don't know is who did it, what website they were on, and everything else about them, And we can use surveys and use research to get an idea of how many bookmarks people have on average, rather than tracking an individual and knowing all their bookmarks, right? And that gives us enough information to make good decisions, hopefully, about how much we want to invest in bookmarks and how it should work. One thing people wonder is how we can provide relevant local search results whilst respecting privacy. And it's a good question, because it's something that we thought about a lot, about how to do that in a privacy preserving way. And location-based search, firstly, it's opt-in. Right? But secondly, we don't use the person's actual location. We use population density to determine an appropriate enough radius to anonymize that person. And then we select a random location within that radius. And it turns out you don't need somebody's location down to room in their house in order to give them relevant local results.
Okay, perfect. That's actually, it'll lead me into something else down the road about more data, better search results, but you've answered it there. So one of the big things that's happening today, obviously in social media, and I think search has a part of it too, is this idea of the spread of misinformation through micro-targeting. I'm going to pull up a couple of articles that I read recently. Facebook allows advertisers to target children 13 to 17-year-old interested in smoking, alcohol, and weight loss. There was another one in the EU where the GDPR is starting to crack down on questionable practices in advertising, because there's a data broker that actually used real-time bidding to profile people with the aim of influencing one, I think it was the 2019 Polish parliamentary election. And the other one targeting LGBTQ plus people, specifically for that election, and profiling even and targeting internet users in Ireland for previous substance abuse incidences. So I know DuckDuckGo has a point of view on this idea of micro-targeting and misinformation. Can you tell me what is that stance, and what are you doing to combat these types of things?
Yeah, so our mission is to raise the standard of trust online, and the rapid spread of hate speech and misinformation erodes our collective trust online. Now, we believe privacy is an essential part of a larger systematic solution required to stop the spread of misinformation online, because it stops that behavioral targeting you mentioned, and the recommending that has been so powerful in the spread of these ideas and the radicalization of individuals. There are clear algorithmic paths on Facebook and YouTube that quickly take somebody who is doing a basic search for information down this path of misinformation, right? And this is because of data collection and algorithms that see obsession as the desired end state, right? So you can kind of think of it as like Clippy, you seem to like conspiracy theories. Would you like another one? Privacy means no filter bubbles, no behavioral targeting, and a better, more trustworthy internet. That's what we're building.
Okay, so let's say, and yet people are going to DuckDuckGo, but there are a lot more people that are going to Google, because there's this notion that if I want a better search experience, you addressed it earlier, I want more data, but you're a smaller search engine. And you're up against this formidable opponent who owns an overwhelming amount of the search market share. So what is DuckDuckGo's strategy, especially in an environment that leaves your company, let's say, vulnerable to potential acquisition? And the second part of that is, can technology still be good and still be able to make money with less data?
Yeah, so I'd say DuckDuckGo is proof that we can make money with less data, right? We're a privacy-focused organization. It's not our focus to take over the world. But, that being said, our revenue is well in excess of 100 million a year, and we're seeing consistent growth of 50% year on year. Now, I think to kind of come back to the beginning of your question, there's this false dichotomy between privacy and monetization, right? And the narrative around advertising and privacy has been defined by companies that have made it their business model to covertly track, manipulate, and exploit people. And that means we have to question every assumption, but two in particular. Firstly, that behavioral advertising is even that effective. And secondly, that nothing could ever match its current effectiveness. So we need solutions that address the real problem, which is data collection without explicit consent, third-party sharing of that data to create profiles. Now, we should be relying more on consumer surveys to understand demographics and first-party data that was given with user consent, rather than this covert spying that's become the norm. So overall, we think the solution is a sophisticated contextual ad network. And the reason why this doesn't exist now isn't because it would be inherently less effective than behavioral, but because of the Google and Facebook advertising duopoly. This duopoly means that no one can challenge them, and they have no real pressure. Oh my God, my phone just went off. And they have no real pressure to respect people's privacy. It's listening all the time, y'all. So taking, advice from Google and Facebook on this topic is just like taking advice on dating from a pickup artist. It is inherently manipulative and self-serving.
Okay, that's so your phone okay now? That's a Siri thing, I think sometimes. It does that to me. Okay, so Google, so let's talk about Flock, because I'm sure everybody wants to hear your stance on this. Google just announced they're getting rid of cookies, okay, towards more what we say privacy preserving alternative called Flock, federated learning of cohorts. So I'll give a quick explanation, and then I want you to explain Google's new Flock as maybe not a privacy solution. So people who've read a little bit about Flock, instead of actually individually tracking you as a third-party cookies, Flock, which means federated learning of cohorts, creates these groups of users, and these groups of users are large enough to make an individual appear pretty anonymous to advertisers. It also said that they're small enough to help advertisers serve ads that are targeted well enough, but it doesn't target at the individual level. So Cate, what are the risks to this?
Yeah, I mean, so like instead of coming up with less creepy alternatives, companies are just coming up with ways to get around changes that ultimately are just as creepy. So it's just privacy washing, and it's more theater than reality. The bottom line with Flock is that it doesn't really change how much data Google is collecting about you. And I really don't think that that's what consumers have in mind when they ask for more privacy and less tracking. And even Google talks about Flock as not changing anything on the targeting side. So like, how can that possibly be better for privacy? Flock is an inherently cynical vision of the web, right? It rests on the idea that consumers will be satisfied with the perception of privacy versus getting real privacy. And we reject this vision. It lowers the standard of trust online. And also, whilst Flock is testing, like Google is still using cookies. So currently people are just being tracked even more through both third-party cookies and Flock and like every other creepy thing these companies do.
So they're actually not getting rid of the cookies then. There's this, okay.
There's a window of overlap, right? So maybe, you know, at some point the cookies will be gone, but like they're not gone yet. They're still there, and like you can cross-reference everything.
Interesting, interesting. Okay, so people will start challenging you. They'll say, well, privacy inhibits innovation. And I know you've answered this before, and I'm just wondering, it says, people say limiting access to data will mean poor web experiences for consumers. And it will eventually hit the bottom line. Yes, you're making money, but what are the challenges to DuckDuckGo? And what do you face when it comes to interoperability and customer experience, especially when Google is still operating like status quo?
Yeah, there was a recent story in Wired magazine that talks a bit about this. The journalist Clive Thompson, he kind of shared his journey from like previous skeptic towards kind of seeing the value of a privacy-focused search engine. And really this narrative, you know, is just gaslighting, right? DuckDuckGo for the privacy-obsessed and paranoid perception, right? And you know, I think to go back to kind of something we talked about at the beginning, like the internet was not designed with privacy in mind. Right? It was a research project. And as a result, like, and over time, like straight up blocking things just breaks things because websites are so dependent on trackers to function. And this is a terrible user experience. And it reinforces people's fears that giving up their personal information is just a trade-off for using the web. And we do not believe that that has to be true. So one way that we manage breakage is we use something called surrogates. So they're basically fake calls that preserve the website functionality, but maintain user privacy, because privacy simplified is privacy, but the web still works.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's one last question. The future of contextual search. Where do you see this going? Especially when we see that AI is probably going to be here. So what is the future of AI and privacy?
You know, AI is just a tool, and the problem is the training data and the goals. So the goals are often addictive behaviors, and the trouble with the training data is garbage in, garbage out. Now, we see this with many AI systems. Google recently released this skin cancer detection project that was trained without any darker skin tones, right? And then they justified it by blaming the field of dermatology for having a, air quotes, lack of data and images for non-white participants. And that is just irresponsible. And further, how can an industry claim to be innovative if we just bring offline problems online and then scale them? Now, we believe, like in terms of advertising, that the future is contextual ads, so targeting content, not people. And current AI systems are built around targeting people. But if we inverted that to content and were more responsible with the training data and the goals, then a whole new world of possibilities could open up.
So we basically take data and we reverse its value. That's what you're saying. And so data may not be the new gold. Maybe it'll end up being context in the future. That's awesome. Okay, so I think we are now going to open up to questions. Mia, let me look to see in the chat. Let me see here. Is your research report available to the public? Is that the one about, what was the question that we had asked?
Yeah, so we publish a lot of our research on the Spread Privacy blog, which you can find from DuckDuckGo. One of my coworkers will drop a link in the chat.
Okay, okay, perfect. Are there any more questions? Okay. Oh, there's the spread privacy. Okay, great.